The early morning haze lingered over the streets of Duskhaven, a small, fog-prone town tucked against the edge of the Evermere Pines. There was a stillness in the air. Not peace, but something waiting. Officer Hawke Vornhart had felt it before. The subtle tension in the wind. The kind of silence that came right before something terrible surfaced. Beside him, his partner Drakkar, a sharp-eyed German shepherd with warlike discipline, moved with unusual restlessness. His ears flicked toward every faint rustle, every creak in the trees. Something was wrong. Hawke had spent the last 7 years walking this neighborhood. Neat lawns, mailboxes decorated with smiling flags, porches still damp with morning dew. But today something was off. The shadows seemed longer, the sounds duller, like the world was holding its breath. And then he saw her. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, stood motionless at the edge of the sidewalk. She was alone, her blonde hair matted with filth, her pink dress soaked in dried mud, clinging to her like damp leaves. Her arms hung limply at her sides, and her eyes, wide, pale, too still for a child, locked directly onto his. Hawke slowed to a stop. Drakkar let out a quiet, throaty growl but didn't move. The child didn't flinch. He crouched to eye level, keeping his voice soft. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you hurt? Where's your mom or dad?" No answer. She glanced, just slightly, toward the tree line at the far end of the block, toward the edge of Evermere Pines, where a wall of forest swallowed the sky. "Can you tell me your name?" Hawke asked again, heart pacing with caution. The girl took a hesitant step forward. Then, like a whisper delivered straight into his spine, she leaned in and murmured, "He's still bleeding. By the fallen tree." Hawke's breath caught. His skin prickled. "Who is?" he asked, but she just stared at him. Her eyes said more than words ever could. She'd seen something, something she couldn't forget. Drakkar stood, ears sharp and body tight, like he recognized a pattern even his handler couldn't. Hawke gently reached for his radio, calling for backup, but didn't wait for confirmation. He had no time. The girl, Syra Thornvale, as he would later learn, was not lying. He secured her in the back seat of his cruiser. As he buckled her in, she clutched his wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "He tried to protect us. But they hurt him first." With a heavy breath, Hawke nodded to Drakkar. The two of them turned toward the forest, weapons holstered but instincts drawn like blades. The entrance to Evermere Pines was overgrown but familiar. Hawke had hiked those trails as a boy with his brother, Talon Grimshade, and their friends. But today it felt foreign. The trees loomed close. The air was thick with rot and pine, silence pressing down like a heavy curtain. Drakkar moved ahead, nose low to the ground, pulling Hawke deeper into the woods. The trail was marked with muddy prints, one set small, childlike, another heavier, dragged, and then splatters of blood, faded but fresh enough to matter. After 15 minutes, they found him. At the foot of a massive oak, partially hidden under underbrush, lay a man, face down, clothes torn, blood pooled beneath his head. Hawke approached cautiously, gun drawn, but it was clear. The man was alive, barely. He rolled him gently, and the face that stared back, battered and pale, hit him like a ghost. Kael Stormrend. Hawke stumbled backward. The man had vanished 20 years ago, disappeared alongside Talon during that cursed summer of 2005. Talon had returned weeks later, shattered and silent. Kael never did. Until now. Hawke's mind reeled. Why here? Why now? Why with that little girl involved? Drakkar circled the unconscious man, protective. In the dirt nearby, scrawled with a broken branch, were 2 shaky words. Protect her. Suddenly, everything felt colder. Before he could think further, a snap echoed from behind, somewhere deep in the trees. Drakkar's head jerked toward the sound. His growl returned, louder this time. Hawke turned, drawing his weapon. Who's there? Silence. But not the peaceful kind. The kind that warned you someone was watching. And they weren't alone. Hawke Vornhart stood frozen, every muscle in his body braced for something unseen. The forest around him had turned predatory. Too still, too silent. The trees swayed gently, but there was no wind. Drakkar stood at his side, fur raised along his spine, eyes fixed into the shadows where the snapping noise had come from. Hawke scanned the dense brush, finger resting lightly on the trigger, heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted out. Whoever or whatever was watching, they knew this terrain, and they were waiting. He took a cautious step forward, weapon raised. Drakkar moved in sync, his low growl growing more urgent. Then, out of the corner of his eye, movement. A figure stumbled between the trees, small, hunched, frantic. Hawke turned his flashlight and caught her in full. A woman, mud-slicked skin, hair tangled in leaves, and wild eyes that looked more animal than human. She dropped to her knees before them, clutching something bundled tightly in cloth against her chest. A blanket stained red. Hawke rushed forward, keeping his gun low but ready. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked, crouching near. The woman looked up at him with cracked lips and whispered with a voice that barely escaped her throat, "You shouldn't have followed her." Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into the dirt. Hawke caught the bundle before it hit the ground. It was just cloth, soaked, heavy, but there was no infant inside. Just an old stuffed rabbit, torn and faded, and a small silver necklace embedded with initials, St. Syra Thornvale. He stared down at the pendant, a cold chill settling in his chest. This woman, whoever she was, had tried to escape with something precious. But from what? And why was she carrying Cyra's belongings if Cyra was found alone? Blocks away, Drakkar circled them protectively, but his attention had turned again to the forest. His growling had stopped, replaced by silence. That, in itself, was worse. Hawke called in their location and requested immediate medical assistance. As he waited, he studied the woman's face. She was bruised, older than he'd thought, and vaguely familiar. Was this Isolde Darkmoor, Cyra's missing mother? The resemblance was there, but time and trauma had blurred the details. Before he could process further, his radio crackled with static. Then a voice, barely audible. "Hawke, it's Talon. Don't trust anyone." The line went dead, and in that instant, Hawke realized. The past wasn't just returning. It had been hiding, waiting, beneath the pines all along. The static from the radio still lingered in Hawke's ears long after the message had ended. He stared at the device in disbelief. Talon. That voice hadn't been heard in years. Not since his brother vanished into silence after being found half dead on the outskirts of Evermere Pines 2 decades ago. And now, suddenly, out of nowhere, "Don't trust anyone." The warning wasn't vague. It was pointed, directed, urgent. But what did it mean? And how was Talon even on a frequency only used by the local department? Drakkar gave a short bark, snapping Hawke back to the present. The strange woman lay unconscious, the child's necklace still clutched in his hand. In the distance, the faint wail of an approaching siren signaled backup was close. But for the first time in his career, Hawke didn't feel relief. He felt watched. He felt trapped. The blanket had a faint smell of lavender beneath the mud and blood. Hawke recognized it immediately. It was the same scent his mother, Morwen Direlace, used to place in their drawers as children. A homemade oil. Specific. Intimate. This necklace, this cloth, it hadn't just belonged to Cyra. It had come from his home. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just a case. It was personal. Someone was sending him a message. The memory hit him like a slow-burning ember, an old photo. Talon, Kael, and a third boy, Ezra Bloodmere. All 3 had gone into the forest that night. Only Talon returned. Kael vanished. Ezra was never even searched for. The police had written him off as a runaway. But Hawke remembered the dread in his mother's voice when she said, "Ezra was never meant to return." It had sounded like paranoia back then. Now it felt like prophecy. Hawke rose and looked down at the woman again. Her breathing had stabilized. An ambulance crew would reach them in under 5 minutes. He should wait. Stay put. Follow protocol. But protocol didn't account for voices from the dead. Or necklaces from childhood turning up on the necks of strangers. His gut twisted with the urge to act, to move deeper into the forest, to follow whatever trail Talon had left behind. Before he could decide, Drakkar let out a sharp, guttural growl and lunged toward the trees again. This time not in fear, in pursuit. There was someone else out there. And they were running. Drakkar tore through the underbrush like a phantom, silent except for the sound of branches snapping under his weight. Hawke followed without hesitation, instincts overriding reason. The forest grew darker the deeper they ran, as if the sun itself was being swallowed by the trees. The mist thickened near the ground, curling around Hawke's boots like smoke. Ahead, just past the trees, a flicker of movement, a shadow darting between trunks. Too tall for a child, too fast for someone injured. Hawke's lungs burned as he pushed forward, heart hammering. Every fiber of his body told him to stop, to regroup, to wait for backup. But Drakkar had never misread a trail in his life. And Talon's voice still echoed in Hawke's mind, "Don't trust anyone." He couldn't afford hesitation. Not now. They broke into a small clearing where the air felt colder, heavier. A half-buried fence post jutted from the ground, covered in moss and rusted wire. Hawke recognized it, a boundary marker. Years ago, before the town expanded, this area had been off-limits. Private land owned by a reclusive family. Locals used to tell stories of rituals in the woods, strange sounds at night. Myths mostly, or so he'd thought. Drakkar stopped abruptly, sniffing the ground. There were fresh tracks, boot prints, leading to a stone well covered in ivy. Hawke approached slowly, one hand on his holster. As he neared the well, a soft sound rose from below. Not water, not wind, whispering, faint, fragmented, like voices bleeding through a broken speaker. He leaned over the edge and called out, "Hello!" No response, only silence, and then a single word, barely audible, "Stormrend." Kael's name. Hawke's blood turned to ice. Someone down there knew Kael. Or was Kael? But how? He hadn't moved from where he left him, unconscious near the fallen tree. Unless someone else had reached him first. Hawke stepped back from the well, chest tightening. He needed answers. Now, the voices were getting closer. Not from below, but around him. Whispers from the trees, faint and overlapping. Too many to be one person. Drakkar pressed against his leg, ears pinned back. And then he saw her, standing just beyond the tree-line, half hidden in fog. A young woman in a tattered black coat, pale skin, eyes wide, lips barely moving. Lysandra Crowblade, Talon's old flame. She shouldn't be here, but she was, and her first words cut deeper than any weapon. "They took him, Hawke. They're bringing it all back." For a moment, Hawke couldn't speak. Lysandra Crowblade looked like a ghost from a time he'd spent years trying to forget. Hair darker now, skin paler, eyes sunken with exhaustion or fear, or both. She stood beneath the dead branches of a black pine, her hands trembling. Time had changed her, yes, but not enough to erase the memories. She'd vanished from Duskhaven after Talon's breakdown, never to be heard from again. Until now. "I thought you were dead," Hawke said, his voice low and uncertain. Lysandra shook her head slowly, stepping into the clearing. "No, just hiding, like the rest of us." Her voice was broken glass, sharp but fragile. "They've been watching us, Hawke, since that night, since Talon screamed in the woods and Kael disappeared. We were never supposed to remember." She looked toward the old well. "But someone is remembering now. And they're angry." Drakkar moved between them, uneasy. The fog thickened as if reacting to her words. Hawke tried to stay grounded in logic, but the facts no longer lined up. Lysandra had no reason to lie, and yet what she said sounded insane. But then again, nothing about the last 24 hours made sense. A missing child covered in mud. A dying man who vanished 20 years ago. A radio message from his brother. And now, Lysandra, whispering riddles in the dark. "You said, they took him." "Who?" Hawke asked, stepping closer. "Took who?" Her gaze turned cold. "Kael. And Talon too. Just not the way you think. They never left these woods, not fully. Something kept them tied to this place. Something beneath the ground, under the trees. When we were kids, we thought it was a game. A dare. But it was real. The Hollow knows our names. The Hollow. The word struck a nerve. An old legend. A name Talon had muttered once in a fever dream after his return. Something about voices underground, clawing through the soil. At the time, everyone dismissed it as trauma-induced delusion. But Hawke no longer had the luxury of dismissing anything. A sudden rustle broke through the tension. From the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged. Not running, but limping. Blood on their shirt. Face hidden by shadows. Hawke raised his weapon. "Don't move!" The figure stepped forward. It was Talon Grimshade, and in his eyes, there was no recognition, only pure, hollow fear. Hawke's breath caught in his throat. Talon stood there barely. His brother's figure was gaunt, clothes torn, face pale as ash, and eyes that weren't his. No warmth, no recognition, just emptiness, like something inside had been scooped out and replaced with silence. Hawke lowered his weapon slightly, torn between protocol and blood. Drakkar remained stiff at his side, growling low but uncertain, as if even he didn't recognize the scent of the man before them. "Talon," Hawke called gently. His brother flinched at the name, staggering backward like it had stung. Lysandra moved slowly toward him, her voice trembling. "It's okay, Talon. You're safe now. It's me." But he didn't look at her. He didn't look at either of them. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the stone well, and stayed there. His lips parted slightly. A whisper escaped, so soft that only the silence around them made it audible. "They woke it up." Hawke froze. "Who? What did they wake?" Talon's mouth twitched as if forming more words, but then he collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. A low, pained moan escaped him. He rocked back and forth as if fighting something inside. Lysandra knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder, but he jerked away with a shout that was not his own. A voice, guttural, wrong, echoed from his throat. "Don't touch me. It sees." The sound didn't match his face. It wasn't Talon. Not entirely. A cold wind passed through the trees, carrying with it a deep, rhythmic humming. Hawke turned instinctively, his skin crawling. Somewhere beyond the clearing, something moved. Not on the surface, but beneath it. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse faintly, like a buried heartbeat. Drakkar began to whine, stepping in small circles, agitated beyond anything Hawke had ever seen. "Talon, listen to me," Hawke pleaded, kneeling before his brother. "You came back for a reason. Help me stop this. Help me protect Cyra." At the sound of the girl's name, Talon blinked. A flicker of clarity returned, a memory surfacing. "She saw it," he rasped. "The Hollow touched her, through Kael. It marked her. They'll come for her next." Hawke looked to Lysandra, then to the trees. The forest had never felt so alive, or so ready to consume. He now understood. This wasn't just about his brother or Kael or the past. It was about Syra Thornvale, and something ancient had chosen her. Talon's breathing was shallow, as though each inhale came at a price. Hawke supported his weight, one arm around his brother's back while Drakkar kept watch, circling the edges of the clearing. The dog's tension was visceral, teeth bared, for stiff, every instinct screaming of danger. But the forest remained deceptively quiet, the calm before something unspeakable. Lysandra stood near the well, staring down into it like it might answer all the questions that clawed inside them. "She's still out there," Talon whispered. "Cyra, you need to find her before they do. Before the others wake." Hawke frowned. "Others?" Talon nodded slowly, eyes half closed. "Kael wasn't the only one marked. Started with Ezra. Then me. Then Kael. The Hollow doesn't kill you right away. It takes you piece by piece." His voice cracked on the last word. "Cyra's the youngest it's ever touched. That's why it's stronger now." Lysandra stepped closer, her face pale. "When we were kids, we joked about it. Made up stories. But we never knew it was real. The Hollow, it's not a place. is a memory that feeds. The more you remember, the more real it becomes. That's why everyone forgot. The town, the police, even your mother. Her voice faltered. They didn't ignore what happened. They lost it, like it was stolen from their minds. Suddenly, Drakkar barked, sharp and urgent, and ran several feet into the woods, stopping near a rotting tree stump. Hawke followed, his hand on his sidearm, heart hammering. What he found there made his stomach knot. A child's shoe, small, pink, caked in mud and blood. He picked it up slowly, turning it over in his hand. Inside, scribbled in fading ink on the inner fabric, was a name. Syra T. Talon tried to stand but winced, falling back with a grimace. They're moving her. Underground, probably. Like they did with me. Like they did with Kael. You have to go. Now. Hawke looked to Lysandra, who nodded silently, already moving to support Talon. We'll keep him safe. Find her. The forest groaned, not with wind, but with weight. The kind of weight that comes before collapse. Hawke looked to Drakkar. Track her. Without hesitation, the dog bolted, and Hawke ran after him, unaware that with each step forward, he was descending deeper into the hollow's memory, and losing parts of himself along the way. The deeper Hawke ran, the less the world made sense. The trees were the same, but the angles were wrong, twisting unnaturally, bending toward him like they were listening. The light faded, though it wasn't night. Time stuttered. Seconds stretched. His breath steamed in the air, even though it was summer. Ahead, Drakkar didn't slow, but his path began to spiral, curving through spaces Hawke didn't recognize, and yet somehow remembered. He passed a tree carved with a symbol, a crude spiral with a slit through the center. The same symbol Talon had drawn in charcoal years ago, during one of his episodes. Back then, Hawke thought it was a meaningless obsession. Now, seeing it etched deep into living bark, he felt it resonate in his bones. A low hum, like a heartbeat beneath the soil, vibrated with every step. The trees opened into a hollow basin, the earth sloping down into a natural bowl where the air was thick and cold. In the center stood an ancient stone door, half buried and slick with moss. Drakkar stopped there, pacing, growling low and deep. Hawke stepped toward it, hand trembling as he pressed against the surface. It was warm, breathing. From behind the stone, he heard a sound. A child's voice, crying. "Cyra?" he called out, and the crying stopped instantly. For a second, the silence was complete, suffocating. Then, a whisper through the cracks in the stone. "You remember now." The door groaned as it shifted, cracking open just enough for Hawke to squeeze through. Inside, the air was stale and wet. Roots hung like skeletal fingers from the ceiling. Along the walls, symbols carved in old stone pulsed with faint orange light, flickering like dying embers. At the far end of the chamber, a small figure sat curled up beneath a rude arch. Syra Thornvale. Her eyes met his wide, tear-streaked, but alert. "I didn't mean to find it," she whispered. "It showed me things about you, about your brother." Hawke stepped forward, arms out, but the moment he crossed the circle of roots, something in the air changed. The chamber pulsed. The symbols flared. Syra's voice dropped to a whisper not her own. "You brought it with you, Hawke, just like Talon did." And then the chamber began to close. Roots moved. Stone groaned. And something ancient woke in the dark behind them. The roots tightened like a living cage, groaning with the weight of time and memory. Hawke threw himself over Syra, shielding her as the chamber trembled. Drakkar barked furiously, biting and clawing at the vines trying to seal the exit. The flickering glow of the runes cast long shadows across the stone, making everything seem like it was moving, breathing. Hawke's pulse thundered in his ears, but deeper than that was the sound. A voice, old and cold, whispering inside his skull. "You remember, and now you belong." The hollow wasn't just a place. It was a wound, old, forgotten, infected with regret, and it had festered for decades, feeding off the grief of those who came too close. Talon, Kael, even Cyra. But now it wanted something more. A resolution. Price. Hawke felt it digging into his thoughts, peeling back layers of memory until he saw himself. 16 years old, standing in this very spot, watching as Kael screamed and disappeared behind the stone door, while he and Talon ran. "I left him," Hawke muttered aloud, the words tasting like ash. "We left him behind." Syra's tiny hand grabbed his wrist. "It's not your fault," she whispered, her voice her own again. "But it remembers everything." From the far end of the chamber, a shape began to rise from the wall, Kael Stormrend, or what was left of him. His skin was gray, eyes hollow, body twisted by years in the dark. But it wasn't rage that filled his face. It was sorrow. A flicker of who he used to be still remained beneath the ruin. "You came back," he rasped. "You came too late." Hawke stepped forward, torn between guilt and instinct. He could run again, save Cyra, escape, let the hollow keep its dead. But deep down, he knew that was exactly how this all began. The cycle would repeat with Cyra next, unless he chose differently. "I'm not leaving this time," Hawke said firmly, reaching for Kael. "Take me instead. Let her go." The runes burned brighter, the roots loosened, and the hollow hesitated. For the first time, it wasn't feeding on fear. It was listening. Behind him, the roots at the exit split open just wide enough for one small body. "Go," Hawke said to Cyra, his voice breaking. "Find Lysandra. Tell her it's done." Cyra ran, and the stone closed. Darkness swallowed everything but the sound of a single breath, Hawke's. The hollow was silent now. No voices, no roots, no breath, just the slow, steady echo of Hawke Vornhart's heartbeat as he stood alone in the stone chamber, eyes closed, waiting for the end. The air was no longer cold. It was still, as if the place had exhaled for the first time in decades. He didn't know if time was passing outside. He didn't know if he would ever be found. But he knew, with aching certainty, that Cyra was safe. And that had to be enough. The walls around him had shifted. The roots no longer reached. The glow of the runes had dimmed to nothing. The chamber had become a tomb, not of death, but of memory. And in that stillness a figure appeared. Kael Stormrend, whole this time, young, unscarred, dressed as he was that summer long ago. His expression was soft, eyes no longer hollow, but full of sorrow and gratitude. "You stayed," Kael said quietly. "That's all it ever wanted." Hawke swallowed, his voice dry. "I should have stayed back then." Kael shook his head. "But you did now. That's what broke it." A warmth spread through the air, not from light, but from release. The weight of the hollow, decades of fear, silence, and guilt, began to lift. The vines receded into stone. The cracks in the wall healed. And with them, so did Kael's form. He smiled once, then turned and walked into the light behind the far wall. Light that hadn't existed before. Then he was gone, and Hawke was alone again, but not for long. A low, distant rumble echoed above, and the ground split slightly beneath him. Not violently, but like a door finally opening. A shaft of golden light broke through from the forest above. Roots pulled apart. Earth fell in soft clumps, and from the crack, Drakkar's face appeared, whimpering as he tried to crawl in. Hawke laughed, a broken, exhausted laugh, and reached for him. Moments later, strong arms pulled him up. Lysandra, muddy and crying, stood with Cyra beside her. Behind them, Talon watched with distant eyes, a man no longer haunted, just tired. Hawke looked back once at the forest as it began to quiet. The hollow was closed, but the scars it left would always remain, and some memories once faced no longer needed to be feared, only remembered.